Okay. Just so you know, it is being recorded today. We make these available on demand, and so today's webinar will be recorded and available at forestrywebinars.net. Welcome, I'm Robert Bardon. I am the host and moderator today's session. I'm here at North Carolina State University here in Raleigh, North Carolina, and will be actually one of our presenters. Today's webinar is titled Timber Sales, Is It Time to Sell? My co-presenter today is Rajan Parajuli, who is an assistant professor and extension specialist in forest economics here, also with our extension program at NC State University. Let's briefly go over the agenda today, so you have an idea of what we're going to talk about. And for that agenda, what we're going to talk about is, first, we're going to talk about markets and the recent developments that might be impacting the markets. Then we'll talk about timber price trends. We'll go into lower timber prices and how landowners might adjust to those. And then we'll move on to talking about how timber is sold in the marketplace, and then what you could do to seek assistance in having a successful timber sale. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Rajan, who's going to be our first presenter today. Before I do that, though, let me remind you, we will take questions at the end of today's webinar. But as you get a question, please type them into the question and answer feature there on Zoom. You'll see the little icon at the bottom of your screen, most likely on the right. If you have trouble with that, we will be monitoring chat also for you to add your questions in there. And with that, Rajan, I'll let you take it over.
All right, thank you, Bob. And good afternoon and good morning, everybody, according to your listen. And like Bob said, thank you so much for joining us today to learn a little bit about the timber markets and sell. When I'm going to talk about the timber market, probably I'll focus more on the southern region. So hope it will be okay with you all. So let me start with a little bit the recent market developments and what is going on. And I'll talk briefly about the timber trends in the past and some of our projections where the timber markets are heading, particularly in the southern region. And then me and my colleague, Dr. Mark Megalos, have put together some of the strategies, I would say, to deal with the lower timber prices, what landowners should do. So the first, let me start with the developments. The first one is we all know and have been experiencing for the last several weeks, the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that it has a devastating impacts all across the board throughout the world, and we know how we have been getting impacted, and they mostly in the market sides, like the stock markets, including the retirement accounts. If you have checked recently, have plummeted dramatically. Specifically in this graph, you can see in the first quarter, the US stocks lost a lot, like Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 23% just in the month of February. So I know the markets are a little bit rebounding this week, but the forecast is not so well. Like I already mentioned, the unemployment in the US is projected to be over 30% in the next quarter or the following quarters. And we know that this is our election year, and that will add a little bit of more volatility in the market. And we don't know how long this pandemic will last, right? And it's long-term impact. So we should expect some sort of the kind of ripple impacts in the market related to timber and the forest products as well. And another development amid this pandemic is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security designated the forest product industry as an essential industry. I think it's a huge one, so that our manufacturers and distributors of forest products, including paper towels and tissues, have been constantly in the production. They don't get halted even in this kind of the lockdown situation. So we know that we are really important sector during this kind of the pandemic and the pandemic situation. We can see that we produce a lot of stuff out of wood and out of forest, masks, filters, wood pallets to move food, medical supplies, lumber and plywood needed for the emergency structures. So this is to some extent, I would say, the good news that our timber industry, forest product industries continue to produce the wood products even in this kind of the fluid and unprecedented situation. And I think everybody has experienced this kind of situation right now, especially most of your local grocery stores are out of the toilet paper, right? So this is kind of the situation worldwide. And if you talk about the our toilet paper market, particularly in the US, most of our consumption is produced in North America itself. So we don't depend much on the import of the tissue paper and toilet papers. So, and we know that this is kind of the panic buying and not a long-term demand shift. What does that mean is like people buy and store this tissue paper in the garage or somewhere in storage. That means like there will be the less demand next month or so. That means like it's not a long-term demand shift, and I don't expect we'll run out of the toilet paper sometime soon. And that's what like forest to market also predicted. And because we have a lot of timber available, and as well as our supply chain has not been impacted much in terms of toilet paper production. So there will not be much of the impact in toilet paper market. And another kind of the good news amid this the pandemic situation is housing stat. I don't know how many of you have tracked, and housing stats market is really good in the last month of February. It's 1.6 million units. It's I think the highest level since the recession. So it is 40% higher than the year ago. It's a lot, but I don't know whether housing market will be in the month of March. I think we'll get to know that within a couple of weeks. But in February, before this pandemic hit, the housing market was really good. This is good news for the timber industry. And another good news I would like to share is like China recently halts tariffs on our hardwoods exports. So this is the part of the deal between the US and China. You know that since mid 2018, we have been with the trade war with China, and our hardwood industry got hit substantially during this period. But right after this pandemic explored all across the world, both countries came up with some sort of agreement, and China halts the tariff at least for a year next year. So American hardwoods, including cherry, oak, and other lumber and logs, are going from the US to China now are like the tariff free. So, however, I quickly checked, and the coniferous exports, mostly the pine logs, we export a lot from the southern states, are not exempted yet. And if you need to know a little bit about the Chinese retaliatory tariffs on our hardwood and softwood wood products export to China, it ranges from 5 to 25%. So 10% tariffs on the pine logs and up to 25% on the oak timber products. Similarly, you can see like 25% on the hardwood chips and pellets. And you can see the pine log exports from mostly from the southern region. We export 90% of our logs to China, dropped substantially, almost half in 2019. So top exporting states from the southern port regions are like the Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida. So, and this kind of the tariff effect is everywhere, especially in all across the wood product export in the year of 2019. And let's move up towards the little bit of the price trends. And like I already mentioned, I have this is just for the North Carolina specific timber prices from the TimberMart South. That is the private price reporting agency located in Georgia. So this is just the annual price changes in North Carolina. You can see we got like almost 13% increase, annual increase in the pine saw timber prices from 2018 to 2019. The biggest increase was the hardwood pulpwood. We don't have a big hardwood pulpwood market, but still the prices for the hardwood pulpwood were jumped 28%. But pine pulpwood dropped 5%, and the oak saw timber dropped about 6%, the annual price change in North Carolina. So I have a little bit of longer historical trend, and I have 3 lines here. The green line is the prices in Eastern North Carolina, and the red line is more of Western North Carolina, and the blue line is more of the South-wide average. When I'm talking the South, the 13 state, I would say like 11 state region from Virginia all the way to East Texas. So you can see the blue line represents the entire South, and the green line in Eastern North Carolina, you can see we have a pretty good, better, I would say not good, better timber, saw timber prices in eastern part of the state. And we have about like $35 per ton in some quarter in early 2019. So the timber prices is still better in North Carolina, especially in the eastern coastal part. Similarly, pine pulpwood market, the colors still represent the same. The green is in Eastern North Carolina, and the blue is more of like a South-wide average. You can see we are still better off in the last 4 or 5 years, and the prices, pulpwood prices, were up to $15 per ton in across the 2016 until 2018. So now again we are going up. Similarly, the hardwood is a little bit opposite, just opposite. The blue line is South-wide. We are in recent years way below the South-wide average, especially in North Carolina. And here is the kind of the overall South-wide timber market trends since or before recession, 2008 recession. You can see, especially in the pine saw timber market, we used to have about $40 per ton. In North Carolina, we had about even like $50 per ton in a few periods. But since recession hit, and we can see from the last decade or so, prices remain pretty much flat or remain like trended downward in recent years. Now about South-wide average is just about $25 per ton. So you can see the prices dropped over 40%, especially in the pine saw timber. And other categories pretty much remain the flat, and hardwood saw timber prices increased, in fact, from before recession in recent years. And this is the kind of the historical, and now let's see the little bit of the future projections. These are kind of the South-wide region, like I already mentioned, from Virginia all the way to Texas. So here, like we have one model, sub-regional timber supply model developed by SOFAC, one of the co-ops located at NC State. And using that model, we try to see where the markets are headed and where they will be in the next 3-4 decades. So based on the current consumption. So you can see this first one is the Southern pulpwood market. The blue line is here the price index, and the gray line is more of like the removals, the annual harvest, and the orange line is more of inventory, the total timber availability. You can see the pulpwood market is a bit dynamic, especially in the coastal part of coastal states, where we have the pellet markets is going well, and then some of the OSP mills, even the fluff mills and pulp and paper mills, they all are competing for these wood chips and the pulpwood. And we expect that the prices increase up to 60% over the next decade or so in the pulpwood market. And chip-n-saw market is even better in our predictions. And the prices is still in the green line, you can see can go up to 200%, because this chip-n-saw category is small one from trees of 9-inch to 11-inch DVH. So we expect that particular DVH has a really important value. And similarly, in the pine saw timber market, bigger trees, trees for 12 to 17-inch DVH, and this is what the recent mills prefer. You can see they are also going up. The bigger news is the largest pine saw timber, which is not so good, because we have a lot of timber available. You can see that the red line is the inventory, especially the bigger trees above 17-inch DVH. You can see that red line is going upward. And with that, when you have the more inventory, and there is put the pressure on the prices, and the prices will remain flat or downward, that blue line, over the next 3-4 decades. This is our prediction just based on the SORTS model. And the hardwood is also not much different, pretty much remain the same. The pulpwood market is will be better, but hardwood saw timber is also, look at the inventory is shooting up. With that, there will be the prices impact in the downward side. And why it is happening so, here is some of the explanation we put together, the recent historical disruptions. Forest in the South reeling from the long-term recession. I showed that graph already. And the tree planting boom during 1980s and 1990s. I'll explain that a little bit, but we had pretty much like a planting boom in 80s and 90s, supported by the coastal program, CRP. So that time we have a lot of plantation acres. Those trees are fully grown right now. And we didn't harvest much during the recession time, 2008, 2009, and even further increasing the inventory. That's what that SORTS projection is showing. We have a lot of bigger trees in the market, and that's pushing the prices a little bit downward. Here is the kind of the supply scenarios. Before recession, we have 15:1 ratio, inventory to annual removal ratio. And after recession, look at the jump, like 25:1 ratio, and currently still 20:1. So we have a lot of inventory compared to the removals recently. And we call it the wall of the wood. And who's to blame? Pretty much forest growth again, like already mentioned. We planted genetically improved seedlings, and the CRP and other cost shares assistance during 1990s. And recession, I already mentioned, that also is pushing at least deferring harvest during the bad market time, and so that further dampening the prices. And another demand side is the sawmill efficiency. So here is one example from our local mill. They say that they need 23% less timber to yield per 1,000 board feet. So that is pretty much from the technology driven. They have a newer technology with the new sawing technology, so that they are utilizing pretty much of all the logs and converting into the lumber. and the fewer and larger capacity mills all across the south. And for that, you have the less competition for your saw timber, which that means that there will not be much of the buyer can have the more power in terms of pricing. So a little bit of the what landowners can do. Pretty much they cannot do anything pretty much in the demand side, right? So no control in the market. Market is pretty much driven by the mills and the buyer side, and we would say that hanging on the larger tree for longer may not be an option now. And here is one example from one of the mills nearby here in North Carolina. They say that their maximum diameter they can saw is 25 inch, but that is the maximum. I think most of the mills these days prefer the smaller log. That's why there is the chip and saw market is relatively better, and they prefer the small diameter log for the better recovery rate. And what can landowners do? And from the economic standpoint, economize, right? Have the larger sales rather than going for the smaller acres tracts. If you have the larger sales and buyers have incentives to come, especially loggers have incentive to come and harvest your property. And another option you can have is specialize, have the higher value product. If you track the prices for the veneer logs and the poles, they have the relatively better prices, so you can do that also, and always minimize the cost. And there are the several state specific as well as federal cost assistance programs, and the preferential tax incentive programs. Always try to tap into this program to reduce your cost substantially. And another option would be always know the local market, right? And diversify your forest stands and what your local mills want. That is always important. If you have the many pulp mills, try to sell your pulpwood, right? And if you have the bigger specialized veneer mills nearby, and try to have like the veneer logs. And go easy on the poor and drought side. They are less productive, right? So, and you can have the other options rather than for the timber production objectives on those kind of the poor sides. And shorter rotations is the another option. In the Eastern North Carolina, pulpwood markets are better. And here is the kind of the quick assessment I did in the last week, and it's still in the preliminary analysis, but what I'm trying to see is like what will be the return scenario if you have a 35-year saw timber rotation versus you have a 18 years pulpwood rotation, and you go easy. Just establishment cost is $150. Don't do much. Just plant and chemically spray and leave, right? And pulpwood rotation, plant 500 trees per acre, and saw timber rotation 436 trees per acre. So in the pulpwood rotation, first rotation, harvest it is 18, and right after harvest and replant for the another rotation. So with this kind of the scenario, my economic analysis showed that when you have a $15 per ton of pulpwood prices, was the pretty much in the Eastern North Carolina side, and if you give the $25 per ton of saw timber at 5%, your net return at NPV in today's dollars will be $350 per acre from two rotations, one from 250, second from 250, but that 250 you are getting is 19, right? So when you bring that dollar back to current period, that will be lesser, so you'll get like $350 per acre. But if you go for the saw timber rotation, just to have the one the thinning at the age 22 and harvest at 35, then you can see that the return will be $332, which is lower than the two pulpwood rotation. So I know that you will not get the $15 every time. That's what I'm saying. Know about your local market, and if your market has a good pulpwood options, and you can always think of this side as well. this is not only from the economic side, you are minimizing risk, right? So you harvest early so that in case of like emergencies or like the natural the calamities and fire at that time, you harvest early. Harvest early is always better, right? So here is another scenario also. If you have like the $18 per ton, it could be the case down the road, right? So if you plant now and wait until 2 decades or 3 decades, and if you get that time $18 per ton, look at you will get the difference between pulpwood rotations and sorting rotation is huge. It's getting $60 in today's dollars, and after 35 years, that $60 means $330 per acre. So it's gonna be a huge one. So like I already mentioned, it might not be applicable everywhere, but this is the option the landowners can at least pursue. And some of the other options already mentioned, and minimize risk, focus on your forest health, fire, and those kind of stuff, and attentive to the land, what your land can offers, natural in the most of the bottom land, and the mixed can also be the good in the pine and hardwood management, and the pine plantation mostly in the uplands and productive areas. And mixed age species management intensities always be better. And those are the kind of the foresters, your foresters or your consultant can support you, or at least consult with them. And here is the one is like if you want to go easy, tap into some alternative income streams. If you don't want to go for the timber production, there are some other non-timber income options available in your market, like explore to carbon and conservation easements, and there might be the pine straw market nearby, and those are some of the alternative income streams you can tap in to reduce your cost. So with that, I'd like to highlight here, like focus on the management for the long term and not the quarterly price reports. So price fluctuates, right? So, and if you are not harvesting right now, so you can just ignore the prices, at least focus on management side, and that would be a long-term a good solution. And with that, and Dr. Bardon will take it over, and he will go with the how to sell the timber and the other details. And I'll get back to you at the end for the Q&As. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajan. Appreciate very much. As Rajan indicated, folks, please go ahead and type your questions into the question and answer program icon or into the chat window, and we will get to them here later in today's presentation. I'm going to talk about selling timber. As Rajan indicated, with markets and everything, gave you some ideas to think about from a market perspective. And for a lot of landowners, markets are important, but they're also maybe put in a situation where they need income for a particular reason and maybe thinking about selling timber at this time. So first of all, in most locations, specifically here in North Carolina and much of the southeast part of the United States, but I suspect across most of the United States, you don't have to be a forester to buy or sell timber. And if you look at the forest industry, there are different people that play different roles when it comes to selling timbers and buying timber. For the industry, you might run into what are called mill procurement buyers, wood suppliers, even loggers can be buying timber, or timber brokers. With the timber buying process, what we see here is that you'll see that the manufacturers, so our forest product industries, they're the ones that might be making 2x4s or making turning hardwood lumber into materials that can be used to make furniture or cabinets or something like that. They are getting their raw materials, the trees, from wood suppliers who might be dealing directly with a set of loggers. And they may cross over. The wood suppliers may feed more than one manufacturer, and the manufacturer might actually reach out to the loggers if the logger is large enough to provide them and buy timber on their behalf as a mill. So it can actually be really almost like a spider web when it comes to feeding the mills with the raw materials that landowners have. And in this process, we know that the manufacturers, loggers, and the timber buyers are all thinking about profit. They all have to make a profit in order to pay their employees and to keep the businesses running. But I also recommend that landowners think about profit. It's important that they also are thinking about the best way for them to capitalize on their investment and get the best return for what they've done for which can be several decades in growing their trees. So who are the buyers often targeting? Well, we know that many buyers are working on the behalf of and loggers are looking for an economic scale factor here when it comes to buying timber. The smaller the acres, the harder it is to actually find somebody to harvest that timber. And what we see here, at least in the southeast, is really about 10 or more acres in size. You can attract buyers for your timber. Less than that, it becomes difficult. I do know of tracts of forest land that owners have had that are down to around 3-4 acres in size that had success in selling that timber. Often, though, that's associated with a timber tract that's being harvested within a mile or two, just up the road kind of situation. So how is timber sold? Well, timber sold basically under two methods. One is called per unit sales, or by the unit, and the other one is a lump sum sale method. The per unit sale method is often used for thinning, for buying stands that are going to be thinned, or buying timber from poor quality stands, or stands that are consisted of small acres. Often these are negotiated type sales in which the landowner works with the buyer to negotiate a price for the timber. They're often sold on contract versus the lump sum sale, which is often sold on a deed. With the contract, you as the landowner would retain the rights to your timber until it is cut. And it does not require to be registered or notarized like a timber deed does. But you as the seller of that timber, if you're the landowner selling your timber, you're going to continue to assume most of the risks for that timber up until it's cut. And this risk might be such things as here in the southeast, we end up with things like hurricanes. And you as a landowner would then assume that risk of the trees being damaged by a storm, but it also might be something like a wildfire, a pest outbreak, and you still are the owner of that timber until it is cut. With the lump sum sale, it's different. Here you often would use a lump sum sale method for a final harvest or for large acres of trees. This method uses a deed. The timber title passes to the buyer upon the deed delivery. So once the deed is everything signed and finalized, and it does require registration and notarization. Once that is all done, it's just like selling a house, which is real property. The rights to that timber then transfers over to the buyer. And at that point, the buyer's taking most of the risk. And it may be on, even with per unit sales or lump sum sales, these contracts and deeds are often 12 to 18 months, even up to 24 months before the timber is cut. So how does the seller know if they're getting a fair market value for their timber? I often receive this question from folks wondering if they got a fair price for their timber. And really to determine if you got a fair price for your timber is you have to know what you have for sale. And the best way to determine that is to hire a professional to come out and give you an appraised value of that timber, to come out and determine an estimated value of what you have volume-wise, and then put a value to that. And if you work with a professional such as a consulting forester, consulting foresters are professionals that are not tied to a timber company. You know, they do not work for forest industries such as Weyerhaeuser's or Jordan Lumber or some of the other that you might be aware of. They are working on their own, paid by you. If you're a landowner, you'll pay them to come out and provide their services, and they're working on your behalf. This would be just like hiring a lawyer, hiring a doctor, something like that, where you're hiring a professional to assist you. Maybe another good example would be a real estate agent. They're going to conduct a cruise of your timber, come up with the volume of what you have, determining the different type of species, the quality of the timber, and provide you then with a value based on those estimated volumes. So the timber appraisal, or coming up with the value for your timber, is the first step towards getting that fair market value. Things to consider when selling your timber. As I said, you don't have to be a forester to buy and sell timber, but you do need to consider, if you go alone, do this on your own as a landowner, if you do not have the training or experience in forestry, you want to consider things that will help you reach that fair market value. First of all, many landowners are often approached with postcards or letters in the mail or knocks at the door in which they're getting an unsolicited bid for their timber. Nothing wrong with that. Timber buyers are out there looking for timber to feed the mills, but what they'd like to do is be able to negotiate with you one-on-one to come up with a price for your timber, and they want to avoid the competition to buy that timber. So unsolicited bids will often get you the lowest price for your timber, and that's because the timber buyer is trying to avoid competition. The next one is negotiated bids, and this, as I said, is often used with the per unit sales, and it's often good for smaller, poor valued stands. And you might have to negotiate a bid because you have a small acreage of poor quality trees. And if you can get 1 to 3 bidders and negotiate with them to get the highest price for your timber, you have now added that competition, and you would receive most likely a higher price for your timber than you would if you did it through the unsolicited method. The best way probably to do this, to get the fair market value for your timber, is to really to set out with the idea of doing a competitive bid process. It's often, if it's the final sale and you're using a lump sum sealed bid method, you seek at least 3 or more bidders for your timber. You collect those bids, and more than likely you're going to find that you're going to achieve the best value for your timber based on that competitive bid method. So seller mistakes. Often landowners that attempt to sell timber on their own, these are some real common mistakes they make. Everything from not getting enough bids. Often I find out from most landowners that are asking me, did they get a fair price for their timber, is they went with that knock on the door. The buyer offered them a set amount of money. They thought it was a good price and took it. And they didn't know what they were really selling. They just knew they had forest out back and wasn't even sure or knew that it had some value associated with it. And since they were offered some money for it, they did that. So not knowing the volume can often cost you, not just not knowing the volume, but not knowing what you're marketing. Do you have pulpwood trees? Do you have saw timber trees? How much of the stand is made up of veneer quality or pole trees? That all impacts the price you would get for your timber. Other problems that sellers often run into are things like not spelling out all of the conditions of the sale before the bidding process begins, or playing one buyer against another. There's not a lot of timber buyers out there per se, and so playing them against each other, they all know each other pretty well and communicate with each other and stuff. So playing one buyer against another will just run you into some trouble trying to find people to buy your timber. And it's hard to believe, but there are still people that will do things by a handshake, and not getting a written contract or timber deed really opens you up as a landowner to liability that you may or may not want to be exposed to and risk. And it also opens up the buyer. I would be wary of a buyer who's willing to deal with you without having a written contract or timber deed. So when it comes to timber, it's important in the steps of finalizing the sale that you look at a couple things. First of all, you want to control your logging rights on the property, and this is done through the conditions of the sale and are spelled out in the contract and deed. Things such as when the weather's wet, what kind of logging can take place, if there's damage to fences, roads, who's responsible for those type of things. Also, maybe like where the landing goes, if there needs to be certain considerations of your neighbors. Those type of things should be spelled out in that contract or deed, as well in when you put up the conditions of the sale, when you set it up, the sale to begin with. When it comes to closing the sale, it's important to have confidence in who you're dealing with and an understanding of what you want to accomplish, so it's important to open that communication. You want to make sure all paperwork is complete, filed, and recorded, and you want to understand who covers what cost in the closing of the sale. The buyer often does not cover everything. It's just like when you're selling a house, there are typical things that a buyer will cover, and there's typical things that the seller will cover. So why might you want a landowner want help in selling their timber? Well, first of all, it can be a substantial sum of money. And for most landowners, they might only sell timber once or twice in a lifetime. It is sold in the forest, which is different than many other commodities, and we work in imperfect markets. It's a commodity that's not well understood. For many of us, we don't realize the markets, we don't follow the markets, especially as a landowner where you might only deal with it once or twice in a lifetime. You just might not be following along. There's many variables to consider when it comes to selling timber. It can be quite confusing. There's things such as deeds, contracts, when to use a deed, when to use a contract, how do you get bids, who do you send bids out to, who can survey the property. All of those things can become confusing and just make selling timber a complicated process. So what are the advantages of using a consulting forester to help sell your timber? For a landowner, they work on your behalf. A consulting forester in many states are required to be registered with their state. If not, many of them are members of professional societies such as the Association of Consulting Foresters, or they might be a certified forester under the Society of American Foresters program. And with this comes along where they indicate ethically that they are working on your behalf as a landowner. They're not tied to the forest industry as being paid by a timber procurement company or something like that. They understand often the ecological and economic aspects of forestry. They can help you with your long-term plans for your forest. Remember, harvesting timber is only the first step to establishing the new stand of trees. It is not the end of the forest. They should know and understand the environmental regulations and help take you through that. Many states, local governments have also zoning laws as well as other regulations from the environmental side that might impact your forestry practices and what you can cut and can't cut and buffer requirements along waterways and things like that. And a forester can help steer you through those type of things. It's important to realize their professional advice is not limited to harvesting only timber. They are often quite versed in things like wildlife management, outdoor recreation, aesthetics, and those type of things that you might really be trying to achieve on your property through your land management goals and objectives. And they can help you do that through harvesting and selling your timber. They work in the markets on a daily basis, and so many of them understand the timber markets, and as well as they can help you save money in things like taxes by getting you participating in cost share programs that can help reduce the cost of reforestation or other timber stand management activities. And if you are in a state that has present use valuation programs, tax deferment programs that reduce your property tax, they can often help you with that by helping you obtain the management plans that you might need to participate in those type of programs. And we also know through research that consulting foresters, when working with them, often can help you in achieving a more productive forest in the future. We know that there is an economic aspect to using a consulting forester, and that research has shown that by using a professional forester, when it comes time to sell your timber, that your land can be 120% more productive following a harvest, that you're more likely to reforest your stand, and not just reforest it, but reforest it to the correct species if need be. And really, the exciting thing for many is the fact that you can often see landowners receive anywhere from 11 to 23% more for their timber when using a professional foresters in selling their timber. You know, this graph here, as you can see from a recent sale, it compares the different acreages in which a consultant was used to help sell timber versus no consultant. And this was for tracts that were clear cut under the lump sum sealed bid method. It's pretty amazing to see that landowners that used a consulting forester and had only 25 acres or less of timber to sell, that's here, the first two bars on the left, it was a 51% difference in the timber price they received on average if they used a consultant versus the non-consultant. As that acreage grew in size, those numbers came down from 51%. Most of them were in the area of 18 to as low as 14% more for their timber. So what does it cost for a forester? Well, that depends. Fees may be based on a daily or hourly rate. The forest acreage that they're working with, they may charge a flat fee or a percentage of gross sale receipts. Most foresters, when they're helping you sell your timber, work on a percentage of the gross sale receipts. And remember, they are really there to represent the interest of the landowner, their client. So how do you go about finding a consulting forester? Well, there are different ways to do that. Often it's recommended that you seek out from friends and neighbors that may have used a consulting forester to help them with their forestry. Professional organizations, as I mentioned, such as the Association of Consulting Foresters, can provide you a list for your region. The Society of American Foresters may also be a way to find certified foresters working in your area that might be consultants. Many state forest services, forestry commissions at the state level maintain and provide lists, as well as do the Cooperative Extension Service in your state. And much of this is online and available to find consulting foresters. And with that, I'd just like to wrap it up and thank everybody for participating today. We are going to take questions at this time. feel free to enter those into either the question and answer feature or into the chat window. So we have had some questions come in while we've been presenting. Here's one in the chat window. Let me start with that one. And this is from Norman Pattison, who's wondering, so he noticed hemp is the most fibrous productive plant there is. Now that hemp growing for fiber has been legalized in the United States, he's assuming that we should begin to see paper product plants being constructed in the United States. He's been looking for information pertaining to the startup construction of paper product plants using hemp, but he hasn't been able to obtain any information. So he's wondering, do you know of any startup paper product plants under construction in the United States? Also, do you know of any existing paper product plants that may be converting to the use of hemp and fiber? Well, Norman, I am not aware of any, and let's see if Rajan is aware of any. Rajan?
Me neither. But yeah, I know here at NC State we have the extension program like but yeah, we researcher just talked about this cereal you have this hemp and the growing hemp, legalizing hemp, and how it is getting the timber market. That's the only I have, and I don't know about the company instead of things like that. But there is a one comment or the kind of the response from Don Huff regarding that. Can you read that, Bob? Just below that,
so
and I think that's a good answer.
So Dan has indicated that his wife sells paper and his best friend is an engineer in a paper mill. The established players have hemp options in their catalog and they will scale up based on consumer demand, which I figured would be the case. There has been basically new plants in the lake states since the 80s where hemp is not going to change that. And I think that's true because as Colby Lambert indicated, for example, here in North Carolina, where hemp production has been ramping up, really it's been focused on the CBD oil market and not so much on the fiber market at this time. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes moving forward. So we have some questions that have come into the Q&A section of our program, and I want to go through those so that we can make sure everybody has an opportunity to hear them. First of all, the first question that came in was related to having FSC or SFI certification. These are 4 certification programs related to sustainability, and they were wondering, does that have an impact on the price landowner gets for the timber? In some cases, we do see landowners get better access to markets because of being having FSC or SFI certified wood. And I am aware of some places where some premiums have been paid for certified wood, but it is not widespread. Probably the best thing is the access to the certified markets.
Exactly.
Next question.
And I think yeah, for example, just to add about, yeah, I think I was thinking about this research to be specific, but everybody said that it's hard to track. But in my opinion, like Bob said, it's just the market access, and most of the buyers these days just for the certified wood. For example, InViva, I think, doesn't buy any wood from the uncertified land.
And then in reference to a question in our chat window came in from Richard Wisner, is wondering where can he find current pulpwood prices by state? So Richard,
yeah.
So there's several different ways to find timber price information. There are pricing companies out there that provide price information. Here in the Southeast, often we seek out price information from Timber Mart South Incorporated or Forest to Market. Some states, state agencies or their cooperative extension service also collect that kind of information and provide it, make it available to their stakeholders. There is no nationwide organization where you can find pulpwood prices or any saw timber prices state by state.
Yeah, I don't know where you are located, Richard. Yeah, I would contact your local forestry or natural resource agency. And I know Forest to Market has some out of South price reports as well. So yeah, it depends on where you located. And in the west side, I think some of the states report their own prices. And even I think New York has its own, and some of the lake states also has their own program, I guess, in terms of price reporting.
So a question that's come in from Chuck was wondering, how has the market responded to the lifting of Chinese tariffs? Do you expect the Chinese market to rebound to previous levels, and if so, when?
Yeah, I think I typed it. Yeah, this is just happened. For example, that China just lifted that February, and we all know that what happened in the month, right? We're going to the lockdown situation, so I don't think we have any response as of now. But hopefully, when it gets a little bit, we get over of these things, and then I would expect some sort of good market flow, especially our exports should go up to China.
So comment from Dennis Parent was that, remember that getting 3 or more competitive bids takes additional time and timber, but of course that means more money, which is true, but a competitive bidding process will more than often net you more than it takes to get those 3 bids. So it's important to have that competition and understand what you have to sell if you really want to make sure you get a fair market value for your timber. From George S., he's wondering, is it now a good time to sell hardwood, or is it better to wait for the economy to return from COVID-19?
That I don't think it's a good time to sell right now, right? So I don't know how many loggers are out there, and I know we are essential industry, and I think our production has not been halted, but I don't know how to answer that question. Please go through what just Bob explained, right? So what factors you should you should at least consider, and always look for the more information from your local market and the local players. And that's the only thing I have. Do you want to add anything, Bob?
Yeah, I think the important thing here, George, is to really look at your local markets. If your local markets, if you have the market such that you get good competition for your hardwood timber, now may not be it may not be a bad thing to sell it if that timber is ready to be sold. There's so many factors going into making that decision. And a lot of it is related to risk. If you were to carry that timber until the COVID-19 is, till we get through that period and move on, you know, you run the risk of some other potential catastrophe, a wildfire. You know, if it gets into the fall here, if you're in the southeast, it might be hurricanes. There's just so many different factors that go into it. And it really comes down to what you're trying to accomplish with your goals and objectives. So probably the first thing I would do is talk to somebody in your region that understands the local markets and see what's going on to help you to make the decision if it's a good time to sell or not. Some folks have chimed in from, for example, Jeremy from Ohio. He has seen the lift of the Chinese tariffs already impact timber sale activities in a positive way there in Ohio. And in Pennsylvania, Norman indicates that the COVID-19 situation is yet to show a negative impact there in Pennsylvania and New York State.
Yeah, I don't know Ohio, what type of impact, positive impact you are talking about, but I don't know where our export business is still running, because I don't know we are sending anything to China during this at least last few weeks. But yeah, hope the buyers started at least purchasing their wood, right? So that they can send when this thing lifted up.
All right, folks, I'd just like to take the time to thank you all for participating today. If there's any more questions, now would be the time to enter them in. Otherwise, we will wrap up today's session. I do want to, if you got specific questions and you want to reach out to Dr. Parajuli or myself, you have our email addresses here. We ask that you stay safe during these times and remember your social distancing so that we can all participate in future webinars. The next one, a part of this series, is coming up here in on April 23rd at noon, and that one will be focused on forest management plans, present use valuation programs, and voluntary ag districts, what landowners need to know. And so we'll see you again, hopefully in a couple weeks. Yes, Rajan.
Bob, do you have a minute? I think there is a one last minute question in the chat window. Range of consulting forester commissions on a sealed bid sale.
Yes, okay, I see that. Ed, so what we often see here in North Carolina is that our consulting foresters are often working on a commission rate similar to what you would expect of a real estate agent, but it really does vary. The important thing to do is when you are trying to find a consulting forester, make sure you get a complete itemized list of the services so you can compare the services the consultants are offering in order to determine what is the best rate for you and your situation.